All right, lots going on this week. We have an exam on Friday. Again, the study guide is up on Canvas for you to check out. We have our third assignment, chapters of 7 through 9. It's going to be due on Sunday. And then we have the cards that I've handed out yesterday. If you were not here yesterday to get cards, follow me after class. I can give you cards in my office. And starting Monday, we're going to be playing around with these decks. So I revealed on Canvas all of what needs to be done for that. So actually, let's just go look at Canvas so I can show it to you rather than talk about it. More sense to me. Okay, so there's this whole section called card game resources on Canvas. You'll see that there are 4 deck images and 2 rules images. The rules will just tell you how to play. And the 4 decks, if you open up one of them, you will see that there are 50 cards that you need to transcribe or print, or I'm not saying anything about how this material needs to get on those cards, but each one of those packs should have 54 cards in them. Hunter counted them at the end of class last time, and there are 50 cards per deck. That means you can make 4 mistakes per deck. If you need more than that, that's probably fine. I think I ordered a little bit extra, but yeah, the goal is to transcribe what is here, aside from the deck A, onto the card. You may want to do something that says this card belongs in deck A, so you don't have to question what deck did this come from if something ends up happening to your card. So maybe a quick color code or a little A at the bottom or something. You have total freedom of how all of this is represented on the card, as long as it is clear to you when you're playing it and an opponent when you're playing against them what this means. So you'll do this for decks A, B, C, and D for each of those. How you do that, I do not care. If you print out and glue on, if you are able to print directly to a card somehow, if you are, I don't know what the easiest route for that would be, but you have a little bit of freedom for that. If this ends up being hugely painful for a large majority of the class, I will get very clever and figure out how I can do this in the future. Yeah.
If you like bend the card a bunch, will they like come back flat?
That's a good question. Haven't tested it. I tried to order what was going to be the best card stock that I could for the price. That said, since we're not utilizing a tech fee for the course, all of this had to come out of my startup funds, which totally fine the first time, but those startup funds are going to go away. So the system that we're going to be using in the future is to charge a tech fee for the course. If we charge a tech fee, we're going to have a little bit more money to play with. I could possibly even print out the cards via some external source and have the cards to hand you, as opposed to you're having to transcribe them. But think of this as the benefit of not having a tech fee for the course. That time and money is yours. It's in your pocket. Think of it like I'm paying it back to you for the labor of putting these on a card. Yeah.
Best I can figure out, the best way to print directly onto the cards is to have a Canon Pixma G3260 printer.
It sounds expensive. That sounds like most people are, yeah, if I had that myself, that would be great. Maybe that's something that I should spend something on if I'm going to be teaching this a lot in the future. And that way I could somehow set it up to print all of this in the future.
Can get it for, or I think it was on sale for like $200.
That's not too bad.
How much does the ink cost?
Yeah, that's a real question.
Currently the ink for that one is cheaper than most other inks. Because it's
The other thing that are in these images are rules. So feel free to peruse these and or print them out ahead of class on Monday. And we'll come in and probably Monday and Tuesday, we're going to get a chance to play these against each other with the goal of trying to identify what are the issues with this game in this current form. So that's what we're going to be doing starting on Monday. Questions about the upcoming schedule, anything else that's going on, what you need to do between now and Monday with regards to getting the information from Canvas onto the cards that you got yesterday and or today. Again, this is just in the Canvas modules. All of that is within the card game resources module. Yes, you can find all of this within the files, but I try to organize it within the modules. So if you go directly to modules, it'll be much easier to find from there. Yeah.
So just make the decks and let them out.
Yeah, so you can either use a pen and write each one onto the card if you can find a way to print them, print the sheets of them, cut them out, put them on the card. However it is that you'd like to either make this your own, feel free to stylize the art and make it interesting if you'd like to. Feel free to not do that and make this as efficient as possible in terms of your time. It's completely up to you. Whatever would give you value. Yeah.
Pick all 4 decks.
Yeah. Yeah. Each person needs all 4 decks for the moment. And because you're going to want to be able to play these with yourself at home as you try to figure out what is balanced or not balanced, and maybe just being able to mock that on your own as well as in class in pairs. Because we're going to dive into this card game at a level that only a designer would care to.
Anything with the rules?
So rules are just for you to understand at the moment. If you know them really well, you don't need them as a resource, but I would recommend at least having a few copies of it. I'll try to print out a few copies of it ahead of Monday's class so that we can come in and just see. I can pass out some rules to people who would like the rules in front of them as they play it for the first time. Yeah.
Bouncing, or you have to change the values?
Quite possibly.
Who should do it?
I will be giving you another 4 decks of cards eventually. And as we go through the course, we're going to start figuring out how to do it. And the final project in the course is going to be all hands off. You can now make any 50 card deck that you want for 50 card decks. But you can modify any of the rules of the game. You can modify any of the values on the cards. You can add some new features, add some new keywords, add some new abilities, with the goal of creating a balanced game that is fun to play. But we'll be getting the resources and the tools for how to do that. But yeah, you'll be getting another 4 packs of cards for that final transcription once that is done. These 4 are meant to be exactly these cards. Other questions? All right, now we can dive back into we were in the middle talking about Blitz last time. And so we talked about all of the rules of Blitz, how to make a paper prototype of Blitz, even though this is a relatively complicated game that you would play digitally. And the goal of this whole thing is to produce a tablet game that emulates this system. There's a lot that we could do on paper before we got started. We got through the rules. We talked about what it's like from the GM's perspective, because as the designer, you would be taking the role of the GM and probably either hiring someone in to take the role of the player and get their feedback. That's actually the next unit we're going to go into and talk about is how do you test? Testing for a game is very different from testing other software. As you play test, you can ask questions of the person who's playing and analyze this for yourself, like did the map layout work? Did it create the dynamic strategy that you were going for when you designed the map? Did the players see that strategy? Were they doing what you thought they were going to do? Were there plenty of places for them to hide and feel like they were hidden? Or did they feel like they were out in the open and not really have, by the time they realized their turn was almost over, they didn't have cover to go hide behind because it was too far away? So did your idea for the map layout work? Are the weapons balanced? As soon as we said that initially you were only going to be using pistols, but as you play the game more and more, you would start to unlock and use the ability to have more weapons. Are those weapons balanced? Even just in a world with just pistols, are they doing enough damage to be able to remove an enemy, kill an enemy in a reasonable amount of time? Are you one-shotting things too frequently? So do the weapons work with themselves, with the rules, and with each other? Do they have different reasons to use them and different strengths and weaknesses? The initial HP is 6. Is that the right value? Is 4 the right value for healing? Does it feel like your units never die? The player's units never die because their health is so high they never take 6 damage in the first place. Or if they do, everyone has the ability to heal 4. So it just feels too easy. How about the interaction between the hidden information and the known information? Was that fun for the player to be playing in a situation where they didn't know all of the information and they had to wait for the GM calculations? Once the GM calculations were there and everything was revealed and it was known, how did that process go? Was there too much for the user to keep track of? Did they need to be asking too many questions of the GM, or was it apparent within your system? Thinking about how this becomes digital, do those issues go away once we transition into a digital world where a computer is making those GM calculations way faster? Or are those persistent issues that are also going to be a problem when we transition this to be digital? Does that mean something needs to change with the design ahead of doing that will prevent one of the issues that could have happened when we go digital? And of course, most importantly, is the player having fun? But that's also the most abstract question. So you would have to ask them, are you having fun? And different players will have different opinions on this for different reasons. But you need to understand all of those reasons so that you can know that you're putting forth the best product that you can. As you're asking all of these questions, make sure you're writing down all the answers, whether the player is stating them or not. You're using analysis to figure out, as you're watching this game unfold in front of you, what is the player experiencing? What are they vocalizing? What are they internalizing? How can you tell? It's what all introverts are great at. So paper prototyping can also help you to figure out, okay, players moving through a virtual space. What does that look like or feel like? Even on paper, we can see how long does it take for a unit to traverse from one side of the map to the other. How many turns does that take? On a small map, on a medium map, on a large map? What does that mean for the size of these maps? Are they too large? Are they too small? Is player movement too constrained? Is it too wide open? If you notice that lots of your players are choosing similar paths through that space, then you can start to put some emphasis. When you go to design digitally this layout or this map, you can start to put more attention on certain choke points that all of your players are finding as they manipulate or they move through the space. You start to understand this is a very important part of my map. So maybe you can start to add some visual markers to what you know is already going to be an important part of the map as you code this for the first time because you have the experience of playing it on paper. So it helps you with all aspects of level design. Also helps you to balance the simple systems. There are much more complicated systems that are going to require more complicated analysis. And as we talk about the balance in a lot more detail, we're going to start talking about this in more detail. But simple systems can be balanced outside of using complicated math or simulations and just using the user experience. So weapons are based on 3 variables. It's not a ton of variables. It was just the 2 hit value, the damage, and the range. Number of shots, damage per shot, yeah. So balancing each of those weapons against each other, even for a simple system, can be quite complex. But, so things that you might notice or care about. A shotgun one-shots an enemy. So how does the shotgun feel to use if it can one-shot an enemy, but it only gets one shot? It's a very all or nothing feeling. You're either successful or not at all successful. There's no middle ground to I've made progress. So because of that, the values that you assign to the shotguns to hit are very important for how likely the players are to feel like I was successful or I wasn't at all successful. So at range 1 through 4, any roll other than a 1 hits. You have an 83% chance of one-shotting an enemy if you're between 1 and 4 squares away from them and they aren't in cover. If the shot misses, no damage is dealt. Retaliation, meaning that they get to fire back on you, is imminent. So it can start to feel like the player doesn't have a ton of agency over that. You can maximize the chance, but if you get that close to an enemy and there's no cover that close to an enemy, you may be receiving return fire for no fault of your own. You have to roll the dice. It's outside of the player's control whether you one-shot an enemy or face no damage and retaliatory fire. So there's a big variance in the outcome of the same decision at the same point in time that is not in the player's control. That's something that any designer should understand about the balance of this weapon and the aesthetics of how it feels to use that weapon. Some players will prefer that. Some players will really avoid the risk inherent in it. On the other hand, the machine gun deals 1 damage per hit, but you need to hit with all 6 shots to take out an enemy with full health. What are the probabilities at each distance of doing that? We need to roll a 4+, so we have a 50% probability. What is 0.5 to the 6th? Did it have 10 shots? Yeah, you have to hit with 6 out of 10 shots to kill an enemy at full health. Okay, that makes it a little bit more complicated. So we need to do some actual combinatorics to figure this out. It's a binary distribution. Sorry, binomial distribution. That should be easy enough to figure out, but it's worth going through to figure out, okay, what is the chance of that happening? How likely are you to hit 6 out of 10 shots at range 1 through 4? 6 out of 10 or more shots. That'll be a cumulative distribution function on a binomial. If you don't know that off the top of your head, this is why we go back through the math of some of this, because you need to understand the math to understand how is a player going to feel when you have control of the balance of the game. Yeah. 6 shots hitting, 7 shots hitting, 8 shots hitting. But even that is, you have to care about the order of those shots hitting. Is it how many different combinations could you have? You could have the first 6 shots hitting. Yes. Yep. It even tells me, due to the 10 shots, you're more likely to get close to the average than the shotgun, which is all or nothing. But you're very likely to deal at least 2 damage, or at least 3 damage, which changes the strategy of using the machine gun over the shotgun. Maybe you use the pistol, you either take out an enemy or they're left with 3 health. If they're left with 3 health, you're likely to be able to use a character with a machine gun to finish them off. But how likely are they? The player doesn't need to know that number to make an informed decision or to just make a decision and see what happens. You, the designer, need to know those probabilities because you need to know how likely it is the player is going to experience success or failure. You can't just make a choice and see how it works. So you could, but now you're doing kind of a binary search type of, you're searching for the right values rather than understanding the mathematical shape of your game. You can also mock GUIs. We talked about this. So you can print different mock-ups of your graphical user interface. So where are all the buttons? Where are all the menus? Where do we go to type in something if there's any kind of input that we need? You can ask anyone who's there without even access to a digital environment. You could put them in front of one of these or the other of these GUI layouts and say which one of these works better for what you want to be able to do. It's great for trying wild ideas. because you can change things so quickly, you don't have to go make sure that all of the rules are implemented. You can add systems, modify systems that change how the game feels very easily. And it's also very easy to revert any changes that you make. So it's a better sandbox than a digital product, unless you're coding that digital product to be that open, which is going to require knowledge of all of the design patterns that are going to make that the case from the very beginning. What are all the variables? What are all the ways we might want to continue this development in the future? So what would happen if every step the player takes receives interception fire? That seems like it'd be way harder now to be moving around, especially if you know there's an enemy that knows where you are. How about damage bonus or an accuracy bonus for firing on a target that's unaware of them? This would create additional player strategy of trying to flank enemies, trying to make them turn in an opposite direction. You could poke your head out with one unit, have them turn to that, and then have this unit on their next turn sneak up behind them and get a damage or accuracy bonus. So now there's interplay between your character's turns. Does that work or does that not? It's a very big change to the rules that we talked about, would have a very big difference in how the player plays the game, but would also be much more difficult to implement in code than it is to just change the rules on paper. If this doesn't work out in the digital product, then you end up having to scrap the work that you did, which is also really annoying. Coders don't like to do that. What is paper prototyping bad at? If there's lots of information that needs to be stored, it is much better to use a computer to store all of that information. We have a lot more storage capability in a computer than we have in our brains, or can fit reasonably on paper. So any visibility calculations, that's something that the GM is going to have to calculate by hand for each unit whenever any unit moves. Having that digitized would be much faster response time, meaning that the player knows the results of their actions much faster, which makes it feel more interactive, more real time. If every time you take a single step, the GM has to spend 30 seconds figuring out visibility calculations, that's not fun for the player. Any kind of health tracking for each individual unit, that's a pain in paper. But if it's digital, then of course, every unit is its own object and has its own health value. Easy. Number of spaces an attacker is from the target. What accuracy do we use for a particular weapon? Well, now we have to manually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm 5 squares away. That could be annoying. Lots of different aspects. So because of this, if you're going to use a paper prototype, focus on the simplest game systems and getting those simplest game systems right. And then you can start doing something that's more complicated. So things like level layouts, very easy to test with a paper prototype. The feel of each weapon. How does it feel to have a character that uses a pistol? How does it feel to have a character that uses a shotgun? You can start to label them. The shotgun is risky. The machine gun is reliable. You can start to use English to describe the balance of these weapons. And of course, you fine tune everything later with a digital prototype. So the goal is just to understand, how does this game play? If you have very fast-paced games or very slow-paced games, the rhythm of that game is going to be very difficult to test for with paper prototyping, if that makes sense. The reason is that the rhythm is different on paper than it is as a digital product. So we don't really know how it feels to interact at the pace that it will be as a digital product on paper. We can't really test for that easily. So thinking about an action game as a paper prototype. What is it like to be in the middle of a Dark Souls or Elden Ring boss fight when it's on paper? Yeah, the pace is so different that it feels different. There's no way to get that same sense of panic that you have when playing those games on paper. So recognizing the limitations of that system is very important to know. So any kind of physical interface. So a GUI, good, but other input types. So something like, how does it feel to use a controller to control your character in real time? That's going to be really difficult to test on paper. I don't know if you've ever tried plugging a controller into a piece of paper, but it doesn't go so well. Not a single laugh. Dang, you're a hard hardcore.
Sharply out of my nose.
So any kind of gamepad or touch screen or keyboard and mouse layout, all of that's going to be really difficult to test. So of course, only a digital prototype can test that kind of physical input control layout for a digital product. So that's basically it. Any questions about the concepts of paper prototyping, what it's good for, what it's not good for? All right. No bullshit, no lying to me. Who thinks if they were designing a game for sale, they would use a paper prototype as the first thing that they do? Few of you. Who thinks they would hop right into the digital production of the game and go from there? About 50-50. Yeah, it really depends on the genre of the game, the complexity of the mechanics. But yeah, I think that really depending on the game, it does make a lot of sense to do it or not do it. And there's value to that. Depends on your development timeline as well. I don't recommend doing a ton of paper prototyping, for instance, in the development that we're going to do for games in the second part of this course, because we are so constrained on time that even spending a week on paper prototyping is going to take away from, that's a fourth of your development time. It's difficult to make up for that. All right, so next we're going to dive into testing. So we have a product that is made in development, somewhere between done enough to get feedback on. So there's some prototype that can be tested, and complete and ready to ship. Somewhere in between that, how do we get feedback on our game? How do we take that feedback and make changes to the game so that the end result is better? Why care? Asking people to point out everything that is bad about your game is kind of scary. You're not really looking for negative feedback. The entire reason you made this is to make people happy. So you're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism. But note that criticism is what leads to future improvements. You're not trying to get someone to tell you this game is good right now. You want someone who is not this person to tell you that your game is good sometime in the future after you've finished it and are trying to monetize it. So you want to make sure that you are doing everything you can so that your testers are giving you honest feedback. That means you need to be very straightforward with them. People don't like to hurt each other's feelings. So someone will say, it was good. If you hear that, that means it was bad. I had fun. I had more fun hungover this morning, is what that actually means. So depending on how you phrase your requests for help, you can really work to allow other people to feel like they can be upfront with you. You're building a connection with your tester that says, if you say something like, I need your help. I know this game has some issues and could be more fun than it is, but I really need help figuring out what those things are. If there's anything you don't like about the game, you're really helping me by pointing out that I don't like this part of this game that is incredibly useful to me and can help me to help make this game better, which is what we're all here for. You say something like that, then the person says, okay, it's okay to point out what I don't like. I'm not going to be judged or criticized for not liking what this person has obviously put their time and effort and energy into. We'll talk about a couple different roles that you can use. So playtesters and investigators. So sometimes they're used interchangeably, but we'll be making the following distinction between playtesters and investigators. An investigator is just the person who is administering the playtest. It's usually either a designer or someone on the design team. And a playtester is the person taking part in it by playing the game and giving the feedback. So investigator wants to get the questions answered, and the playtester is providing those answers. So how does one playtest effectively? Let's first put ourselves in the shoes of the playtester, and then we will put ourselves in the role of the investigator, because both of those roles are very important, and you'll probably be playing both of those roles at some point in this course. If you go on to develop games, you will certainly be putting yourselves in these shoes. So great playtesters think out loud. It's like, think about you being in a coding interview. You want to describe the process that you're going through in case you get to a wrong answer, or you considered the right approach, but didn't take it for some reason. Your interviewer will catch on to that and give you some credit to say, this person is critically thinking about this problem. They know this and that and the other thing. And if they're just watching you saying nothing in the middle of your interview, then they can only go off of the information, whatever it is that you type, whatever the final product actually is, and not your process. Your process can really only help you. It very rarely hurts you to think out loud, at least if you got the interview in the first place. Similar to a playtester, the investigators want to know how you are processing thinking about the game that you are playing. When you first play something, it's especially important. It gives you a sense of those first impressions, the emotions that your game is evoking. If you're fighting the same boss for the 5th time, it doesn't feel the same as if you're fighting it for the first time ever. It's a very different experience. Someone can only play something for the first time once. You also want to tell them about any biases that you have as a playtester. So if you're really familiar with this genre, you've played very similar games, then that's useful information for how you react to the game and how the investigator should classify the data that they're getting from you. So talk about anything you are familiar with that reminds you of, how is this similar? Oh, this reminds me of that time in the Matrix when something, and you as the designer or developer can now think, yes, that is exactly what I was trying to evoke, was that same feeling from a film, and that kind of film specifically. You can also self-analyze. So as you're reacting to whatever it is, start to talk about why you're reacting that way. That really scared me and I was not expecting that. Something like that tells you more than just, ah. As the investigator, now you have to interpret the, ah. What does that mean? But if the playtester is walking you through, I didn't expect the enemy to pop out from there. I thought something might happen, but it scared me anyway. That's a lot more information for the developer. Vague statements are the bane of everyone's existence, students on exams and playtesters playing games. So I feel happy as I'm playing this game. As the designer, what can you take away from that? Not very much. It's positive feedback, but you can't dive any more into it than that. Why are they happy? What about my design made them feel happy? What are they experiencing that is behind this feeling? You get none of that off of vague statements like that. I feel happy because this jumping mechanic makes me feel powerful. Much more information. Even this jumping mechanic makes me feel powerful. You can infer the happy easier than if you say, I feel happy, you could infer it's because the jumping mechanic makes the player feel powerful. So the details are way more important than anything else here. We want to separate the elements of the game. So as a playtester, yes, you're playing the game to play the game, but a good playtester also knows how to separate the elements of the game from each other and comment on each of them separately. So You can give overall feedback, but then you also want to dive into the elements of the game. So what was the art like? What were the mechanics? How did the mechanics make you feel? Were they appropriate? The overall game feel, sound, music, setting, and narrative. They could analyze those as individual elements. And that's what you will be doing when you review games in the second part of the course. So you will be receiving games that other people developed. Your goal is to provide them with good feedback. How are you going to do that feedback? You can give overall impressions, but you're actually going to want to dive into each element of the game and give them feedback about how that element as a designer, as it was designed, how did that help the game overall or hinder the game overall when it came to how much fun did you have? That's much more useful as feedback. You can imagine now getting that feedback for a game that you made. The more detailed that feedback is, the more you can learn from it, iterate on it, and the next game you produce is going to be better. You can avoid overgeneralization, which is good. Helps the investigators to focus on what the weak points are in their game. If it happens to be that the setting and narrative just doesn't do anything. Everything else is great. It's fun to play, but the setting and narrative just, I found myself skimming or just very quickly trying to advance the text because I didn't care. That kind of feedback is useful if you want your game to have a solid setting and narrative that maybe that aspect of the game needs a significant amount of work. If the investigators don't like your ideas as a playtester, doesn't matter. Your experience is valid, and their task is to accumulate all of this feedback on the whole. It could just be that you're the weirdo who doesn't like their game, and there are 10,000 other people who do. That doesn't detract from the fact that your feedback is your feedback and was valid. It's a data point, but it's a data point in a much larger circle of data points. So you should share your opinion the way your opinion is and not try to fit in with the herd. Let them do that analysis to figure out what changes need to be made to help target the majority of the players that I'm trying to target with the game. So just recognizing the game is being made for more people than just you. So design and playtesting, letting go of ego. Goodbye. Keep that confidence, but don't be overconfident. Don't think that everything you produce is the best thing that's ever been produced because I like it. It's about other people. We'll shift focus now to the different levels of playtesting. So as your game evolves, who should you be targeting with different levels of playtesting? So we're going to do it in stages, and it expands as the game's scope and how close it is to being finished scales as well. So we're going to have a bunch of circles. Each circle increases in size, and each of those circles is targeting a different kind of feedback so that we go from early iterations to later iterations. So the first circle is just you. You can imagine as you're designing a game, you can play it yourself. You can make some decisions about how good this whole system is. You're also going to be the most frequent playtester, which means you have the most bias, but at the same time, it's the easiest to get that data. You sit down, you play the game, you can tell how it changed. You can tell how it feels to you. So if you have a digital prototype, every time you enter your game world in Unity, you are acting as a playtester. Even if it's something as simple as, does this system work? Can I move around in this scene? You're playtesting. Even if you're really just looking for a bug or determining, all right, that script I wrote and attached to my player character, hey, it works. But now you're actually playtesting because yes, it works, but you can start asking questions like, am I moving around fast enough? Are there bugs associated with that? So you're playtesting, you're looking for stuff. So the circle that is you can frequently be thinking about, okay, how can I help this game move in a direction that we as a development team want to be moving toward? How can I provide that feedback that helps this game move on the trajectory that we want it to move on? This means that your feedback is most valid early on in the development cycle. As the game gets closer and closer to what it's going to be, the bugs get harder and harder to find. The tweaks that need to be made are more and more finicky and are harder for a single person, regardless of who they are, to find and understand and work with. But we can't do everything ourselves. We need to have other people play our game eventually. When we get to this process, so we're not going to allow people to play test a game before they review it. So we'll talk about this more in the second part, but don't share your game with your in development game with other people in this class, because they may need to review it later. If things have changed, they may end up biasing themselves based on the version of the game that they play tested. And you want that review to be based on a first impression of the game. So you will need to find other people outside of this class to play test your game. Within your own group, great. Friends who are not in this class, great. Even if they're planning to take this class at a later date, great. Family members, great. Just not people in this class who might end up reviewing your game. Second circle is just trusted friends. You yourself are going to iterate to the point where you are happy. You don't think there's anything major that needs to change, or if you do think there's something major, you don't know exactly what that is going to be yet. You can't quite identify what the issue is. You know there's an issue, but you can't identify it. The best playtesters are eventual players of your game, so someone who wants to play your game eventually, or some other expert designer or developer, someone else in the community who has gone through this process before. They can help you do that. They can help you, give you a point of reference and help you to work toward the target audience that you are trying to develop for. Developers are very good at technical feedback, and they can give you some feedback that general game players can't give you with regards to the technical issues that you might be running into. And of course, this is where a lot of the most heinous bugs are found. I have some great examples of past games that were developed by students that have some hilarious bugs. And they should have been found and caught by this group of people, because we didn't quite have enough time. They still exist in the game, and boy, are they fun. It's also fun to note that this is a big celebration point in the development of a game when someone who didn't make the game starts playing it. That's cool. That's not something that you get in computer science many other places. You're on a development team, you release a product. Yeah, someone's going to use your product, but it was designed to their specifications, not to your own creativity. When someone plays something that you invented and you created, there's something special about that. I don't know, I like to take a moment and really appreciate it. But they will also find bugs that you didn't even think about because they're not you, they play the game differently from you. So it's very worthwhile to get that feedback. If it's an online game, you're testing the networking code off of someone else's machine for the first time. You're checking your back-end code to make sure that everything is being handled correctly from a connection that it hasn't been made before. There's a kind of playtester called a tissue playtester that just basically means they're brought in one time to play the game, and that's it. You let them go, and they don't come back to give you feedback as the game develops. They're there to just give you that feedback, and then they disappear. And we talked about this, you can only see a game or play a game for the first time once. So tissue play testers are mostly used to get that idea of what is it like to play this game for the first time. So something like the tutorial system. Once you played a game before, you're biased when you go back to the tutorial to play the tutorial. So you need someone new who's never played the game before to test the tutorial. You make a small tweak to the tutorial, you can't bring back those same people. You need to find new people to play the tutorial for the first time. Also, the first few levels. Once you become an expert in the game, going back to the first few levels, again, you're biased. You are more skilled than most players who are going to be playing those first few levels for the first time. Can a new player succeed at those mechanics? Well, you need more new players every time you make those changes to be able to see if you're new at this, how successful are players at that skill level. It's really hard to emulate someone who is not skilled at a game after you yourself are skilled at that game. You can also, if your game is story or narrative driven, then you will want to be able to analyze what is the emotional effect of any plot twists, anything that you would expect them to see in the story. As soon as you've seen it, then you know that twist. It's not going to come as a huge surprise after the first time. How about when the game ends? Do players feel like all of the plot points were tied together? Are they ready to put the game away? Feel like everything has been resolved? If not, then it's something that you can only experience for the first time. Third circle. Any acquaintances and other people who are outside your close circle of friends. So you've reached now a point where the game seems solid. The second circle is no longer finding any bugs. Then it's time to create a new scale. We need more people to find the corner case bugs, the particular hardware configuration bugs, the 1 person out of 10,000 who plays the game this way kind of bugs. So anyone outside of who you know. We know this about things like social media circles. People who are close to you tend to share your thoughts and beliefs and ways of thinking. So the more you can expand beyond your inner circle, the more you can start to get experiences that differ from those that you are used to. And that can be useful when designing a game to target some players who are not immediately like you or people that you tend to get to know. So you can start to hear new reactions to your game. So where would you go find people? Well, CS majors in general love games. Probably more so than the general public. CS professors also generally like games. Other college students, people at this age, usually like games. So there's lots of opportunity in and around to find people in your community who like games. Anywhere that people gather to play games, if people go there to buy games or to play games, they may be interested in testing your game. And of course, community events. And again, it's obvious that I wrote this over the pandemic where community events weren't really happening, but community events that happen around the community are great for also talking about, hey, I'm designing a game. Does anyone want to test? So any kind of con that you would go to potentially, or any community event. All right. I will end on this note. We will expand to the circle of the land of awful comments at the, I can't say the start of tomorrow's class, but the plan for tomorrow is I will not do anything until we run out of questions about the exam or preparation for the exam. If you have any questions about that I can answer today and not wait for tomorrow, I can answer those. Feel free to come up to my office. I'll get that handled.
You've written the exam yet?
I have a draft of the exam, and I'm not 100% happy with it yet. So, another task this afternoon is to go through and iterate and make sure that I'm at least happier with it. Yeah.
Can we see your draft?
No. That actually is not possible with this exam, because I have people making so much. Not one right answer. I don't like designing exams where there's one right answer.